The divorce between Nicole Kidman and Keith Urban didn't end with a dramatic courtroom battle. It ended quietly, on paper, with details that are only now coming into focus. After nearly 2 decades of marriage, the most surprising part isn't that the split happened. It's how carefully everything was structured once it did. No child support, no spousal support, no public fight over assets. And yet, behind those clean legal lines sits a much more layered story about timing, distance, and a marriage that may have been unraveling long before anyone realized. Because when you look closely at what was agreed to and what wasn't, the picture changes. The divorce between Nicole Kidman and Keith Urban was officially finalized this week, bringing an end to a 19-year marriage that had long been viewed as one of Hollywood's most stable partnerships. According to court documents obtained by multiple outlets, both parties agreed to waive child support and spousal support entirely. That decision alone set this case apart from many high-profile separations. The reasoning, according to the filings, was straightforward. Both Nicole and Keith reportedly earned well over $100,000 per month. From a legal standpoint, neither party required financial assistance from the other. But financial independence doesn't explain everything. The parenting arrangement reveals more nuance. Their 2 daughters, Sunday Rose, 17, and Faith Margaret, 15, will live primarily with Nicole, spending 306 days per year in her care. Keith will have custody for 59 days annually, structured around every other weekend, a schedule reportedly shaped by his touring commitments. On paper, it's a practical solution. In reality, it reflects the life they had already been living. According to sources cited by multiple publications, Nicole and Keith had been spending extended periods apart for years. Her filming schedule often kept her overseas, while his world tours took him across continents. One insider described it as living separate lives long before legal paperwork entered the picture. That detail reframes the divorce not as a sudden collapse, but as the formal conclusion of a long transition. Nicole filed for divorce in late September, citing irreconcilable differences. Reports suggest the separation itself may have begun months earlier, quietly and without public announcement. And while the final settlement appears calm, sources indicate the emotional reality may have been anything but. According to reporting from people in TMZ, Nicole had reportedly been trying to save the marriage in the months leading up to the filing. She was said to be committed to working through issues, particularly those tied to pressure, distance, and long-standing concerns about stability. Keith, however, was described by sources as already having reached a decision. That imbalance, one partner still trying, the other already moving on, is a pattern often seen in long relationships that end quietly rather than explosively. Another detail that drew attention was Nicole's decision to waive her right to appear in court on the day the divorce was finalized. She had reportedly returned from Australia with her daughters just 1 day earlier. Legally, her presence wasn't required. Symbolically, it reinforced the tone of the entire settlement: private, restrained, and procedural. There were no public statements attacking one another, no social media posts, no competing narratives. Instead, both parties agreed to divide all assets, including property, investments, vehicles, and personal items, by mutual agreement, with each retaining what they currently possessed. That includes a property portfolio estimated at over $200 million, spanning the United States and Australia, from Nashville to Beverly Hills, from Manhattan to Sydney, from urban apartments to rural land. Each property carries not just financial value, but years of shared life. And yet, none of them became the centerpiece of the divorce, which raises an obvious question. If money wasn't the problem, what was? To understand why this divorce unfolded the way it did, it helps to step back several years. Before court filings, before settlements, and before the quiet confirmation that the marriage was over. For much of their relationship, Nicole Kidman and Keith Urban were described as opposites that worked. Different careers, different rhythms, but a shared commitment to family. Interviews over the years often emphasized how intentionally they tried to protect their private life from public pressure. They chose Nashville over Hollywood as a primary home. They spoke about routine, simplicity, and stability. They presented a partnership built on structure rather than spectacle. But structure becomes harder to maintain when time itself becomes fragmented. According to sources cited by multiple outlets, the last few years of the marriage were increasingly shaped by absence. Nicole's career entered an especially demanding phase, with back-to-back film and television projects requiring long stretches abroad. At the same time, Keith's touring schedule intensified, keeping him on the road for months at a time. Individually, both careers were thriving. Together, the distance added up. One insider described it as a slow drift rather than a single breaking point. Not arguments that exploded, but conversations that never happened. Not conflict, but parallel lives. This context matters when evaluating reports that Nicole was blindsided by the split. According to sources quoted by The Sun and TMZ, Nicole had been actively trying to stabilize the marriage, particularly as pressures increased. She was said to believe that the challenges were temporary, something that could be managed once schedules aligned again. Keith, according to those same reports, had already reached a different conclusion. This dynamic, one partner still focused on repair while the other has emotionally exited, often leads to endings that feel sudden to the outside world, but inevitable to those inside them. Another recurring theme in reporting was concern and care versus control. Sources close to the situation suggested that Nicole's efforts came from a place of vigilance and protection, especially regarding Keith's past struggles with alcohol. Keith has spoken openly for years about his recovery and the work required to maintain it. Insiders described a relationship where concern became pressure, and pressure became exhausting. Not because either side lacked good intentions, but because long-term stress can change how care is experienced. One source framed it simply: the margin for error felt too small and the emotional cost too high. By the time Nicole officially filed for divorce in September, the separation was reportedly already in effect. Several outlets noted that the couple had been living apart since the start of the summer, even if no public announcement had been made. Again, the pattern is consistency rather than chaos. The settlement itself reflects this. Both parties agreed not to pursue spousal support. Both agreed to cover their own legal fees. Both agreed to divide assets privately, without litigation. Even the custody arrangement appears shaped by existing reality rather than negotiation leverage. Keith's time with the children aligns with his touring calendar, while Nicole's schedule allows for a more stable home base. There is no indication of a custody dispute, no claims of unfitness, no public disagreements over parenting. Instead, the documents reflect what the relationship had already become: coordinated, respectful, and separate. As news of the finalized divorce spread, attention quickly shifted to rumors, particularly speculation that Keith may have moved on. Reports circulated linking him to his guitarist, Maggie Baugh, though no official confirmation has been made. Some outlets pointed to a lyric change during a performance as symbolic, while others cautioned against reading intent into artistic expression. Importantly, none of these reports have been substantiated by direct statements from either party, and that silence is consistent. Nicole has not commented publicly beyond what was required legally. Keith has not addressed speculation directly. In an era where many celebrity splits play out online, this one has not. Which raises another question. Is this silence strategic, or simply reflective of two people choosing restraint after a long, private unraveling? Because if there is a defining characteristic of this divorce, it is not conflict, it is control. Control of narrative, control of process, control of exposure, and that may explain why the settlement feels so clinical, and yet so final. When attention turned to money, many expected this to be the point where tension surfaced. After all, Nicole Kidman and Keith Urban were not just a long-married couple, they were also the stewards of a global property portfolio valued at more than $200 million. Yet once again, the outcome defied expectations. According to court documents and reporting from multiple outlets, the division of assets was handled entirely by mutual agreement. No court-ordered split, no forensic accounting battle, no public inventory of who took what. Each party retained the properties and assets already in their possession, with the remainder divided privately to their shared satisfaction. That decision alone speaks volumes. Over the course of their marriage, Nicole and Keith accumulated homes across the United States and Australia, not as speculative investments, but as functional spaces tied to work, family, and long-term planning. Their Nashville estate served as the emotional center of their family life. Nicole had previously described it as intentionally simple, quiet, and grounding, a place designed to disconnect from industry pressure. That property is expected to remain her primary residence, particularly given the custody arrangement granting her the majority of parenting time. In Los Angeles, they owned a Beverly Hills home that functioned as a base during filming schedules. In New York, they invested in multiple Manhattan properties, including a high-end duplex and a Tribeca apartment. And in Australia, their real estate footprint expanded steadily over the years, including multiple apartments in a single Sydney high-rise, as well as a large rural property in New South Wales purchased with long-term retirement in mind. Each of these homes represents a chapter, and yet none became leverage. The absence of conflict around property suggests that the emotional separation had already occurred long before the legal one. When couples fight over assets, it is often because those assets are still symbolically shared. Here, the separation appears to have already been internalized. Another detail that quietly reinforces this is the lack of clarity around a prenuptial agreement. Court documents do not confirm whether one existed, but the settlement itself functions much like a prenup in practice: clear boundaries, financial independence, and minimal entanglement. What's striking is not what was contested, but what wasn't. There were no competing narratives about sacrifice, no claims of imbalance, no attempts to reframe the past through financial grievance. Instead, both parties accepted responsibility for their own futures. This approach mirrors how they handled the public narrative of their marriage itself. For years, they avoided oversharing. Interviews focused on work, family values, and mutual respect, rather than intimate detail. That consistency carried through to the end. Still, even the most orderly settlements leave unanswered questions. Sources close to the situation suggest that while the legal process was smooth, the emotional reality was more complex, particularly for Nicole. Reports indicate she invested significant effort into maintaining the marriage, even as schedules pulled them further apart. Helping a partner through personal challenges while managing an intense career and parenting responsibilities placed sustained pressure on the relationship. Over time, that pressure appears to have reshaped the dynamic. When concern becomes constant, it can shift from support to strain, not because intentions change, but because emotional bandwidth does. From Keith's perspective, sources suggest the relationship reached a point where continuation felt unsustainable. Not explosive, not dramatic, simply depleted. That kind of ending often leaves no single moment to point to. No betrayal, no definitive incident. Just a gradual recognition that the structure no longer holds, which helps explain why the finalization felt administrative rather than emotional. The paperwork arrived after the separation was already lived. As news of the finalized divorce circulated, public reaction was mixed: surprise, sadness, and curiosity. But beneath that was a quieter recognition. Long marriages don't always end loudly. Some end with raised voices, others end with silence. And silence, in this case, may have been intentional. By limiting public statements and avoiding spectacle, both Nicole and Keith preserved something often lost in celebrity divorces: dignity. They allowed the focus to remain on logistics, parenting stability, and closure rather than blame. And that choice reframes the story entirely. Because this is not a narrative of collapse. It's a narrative of conclusion. Two people acknowledging that the life they built together no longer aligned with the lives they were now living. One of the most quietly revealing elements of this separation is how deliberately both sides handled time. Not just money or property, but daily life itself. The parenting plan, while highly structured, reflects an understanding of reality, rather than idealism. Nicole's schedule, though demanding, allows for longer periods in one place between projects. Keith's life, shaped by touring cycles, operates in shorter, more intense bursts. Instead of forcing symmetry, the agreement prioritizes stability. The children remain anchored primarily in one environment while maintaining consistent, predictable time with their father. No rotating chaos, no constant relocation, just a framework designed to minimize disruption. This is often overlooked in high-profile divorces, but it may be the most important decision of all. Another detail that stands out is what wasn't included in the settlement. There are no ongoing financial ties, no shared accounts, no future support obligations, no open-ended arrangements that require continued negotiation. Once finalized, the agreement allows both parties to move forward independently, financially, professionally, and personally. That kind of clean break is rare after nearly 2 decades together. It suggests that the separation wasn't driven by impulse, but by prolonged reflection. Sources describing the couple as having lived separate lives for several years point to a slow emotional uncoupling rather than a sudden rupture. When distance becomes routine, it eventually stops feeling temporary. Careers that once felt complementary begin to compete for limited time and energy, and even mutual respect can't always bridge that gap. In many ways, this divorce mirrors a broader shift happening quietly among long-term couples, especially those with demanding professional lives. Not every ending is explosive. Some are administrative, some are logistical, some are simply honest. And honesty, while less dramatic, can be more final. Public speculation has naturally followed, particularly around rumors of Keith moving on. But it's worth noting how carefully those reports have been framed, as unconfirmed, indirect, and largely based on interpretation rather than statement. Neither party has publicly addressed these claims. That silence matters. It suggests an intentional boundary. The marriage may be over, but it does not need to be rewritten, relitigated, or sensationalized. There's also a subtle but important shift in how this story has been covered compared to celebrity divorces of the past. The focus is less on blame and more on structure, less on scandal and more on process, less on spectacle and more on outcome. And that may reflect how Nicole and Keith themselves approach the end. No dramatic joint interview, no competing narratives, no attempt to control the story through oversharing. Instead, they allowed verified documents and restrained reporting to speak for themselves. For public figures, that restraint is a form of control. It prevents the story from escalating. It limits misinterpretation. And it protects the people most affected, particularly their children. If there is a defining characteristic of this divorce, it's not wealth or fame. It's intentionality. Every decision, from custody to finances to public silence, appears designed to reduce friction rather than amplify it. That doesn't mean the process was painless. It means the pain wasn't weaponized. And that distinction is rare. As their marriage officially closed, neither Nicole nor Keith framed the outcome as failure. There were no public apologies, no defensive explanations, no emotional appeals. Just an ending. And sometimes that's the most respectful outcome possible. What also deserves attention is how this divorce reflects a broader evolution in how high-profile couples approach separation in the modern era. In the past, long celebrity marriages often ended with prolonged legal battles, public disputes, and competing narratives released through carefully chosen outlets. Every detail became content. Every disagreement, a headline. This case moved differently. From the timing of the filing to the speed of finalization, the process suggests preparation rather than reaction. Legal frameworks were already in place. Expectations had already been discussed. The settlement reads less like a negotiation and more like an execution of previously agreed boundaries. That doesn't happen overnight. It typically follows years of quiet recalibration when two people begin redefining their lives individually while still maintaining shared responsibilities. By the time paperwork is filed, the emotional decision has often already been made. There's also an important distinction here between privacy and secrecy. Nothing about this divorce was hidden, but nothing was dramatized either. Verified documents were made public. Reliable outlets reported consistent details. Speculation was acknowledged, but not amplified. That balance is difficult to maintain, especially when public curiosity is high. And yet, it held. It also reinforces something often misunderstood about long marriages. Longevity does not guarantee permanence, but it does often produce maturity in how endings are handled. After nearly 2 decades together, Nicole and Keith didn't need to prove anything to the public. There was no reputation to salvage through performance. Their careers were already established. Their identities were already separate from the marriage. What remained was responsibility. responsibility to their children, responsibility to their shared history, and responsibility to end something respectfully rather than destructively. In that sense, the divorce becomes less a story about loss and more about transition, not the collapse of a partnership, but its conclusion. And while the public may always search for a single reason, a final mistake, or a dramatic turning point, the available information points to something quieter and more common than that, a gradual realization, a mutual acknowledgment, and a structured decision to move forward differently. That may not be the most sensational version of events, but it may be the most accurate one. When long marriages end quietly, they challenge the stories we're used to hearing. We expect dramatic turning points, clear villains, one defining moment where everything changed. But what if the real story is simpler and harder to explain? Two people growing in different directions, two demanding lives gradually losing overlap, and a shared decision to stop pretending that endurance alone equals success. Nicole Kidman and Keith Urban didn't just end a marriage. They closed a chapter without trying to rewrite it. And that raises a bigger question. Are quiet endings becoming the new norm for long-term relationships? Especially among people who understand the cost of public conflict. In the next video, we'll look at how silent divorces are reshaping celebrity breakups, why they're increasing, and what they reveal about modern partnerships behind closed doors. If you want that deeper context, that story is waiting next.